Hey guys, before you jump too deep into this video, I'm not here to talk about the draft network, the draft, my job, or any of that stuff. There will come a time for that, but right now I'm here to talk about my old tweets, my old mindset, and the major issues of racism and homophobia in our culture today. While I appreciated the number of people who have reached out to offer encouragement over the past few weeks, the reality is that I was also discouraged by many that seemed to downplay the issues my tweets from the past had addressed. I wasn't mad, instead just saddened that the outcry in our culture does not seem to be unanimous or even balanced in our frustration and condemnation of the type of behavior and speech I once participated in. Many have said those old tweets were just foolish words that many others have said, but this issue is so much bigger than that. The people who speak like I once did are the same people that deny loans, determine salaries, hire and promote people within the workplace, educate our young people, and so much more. Those words and sentiments, even used in a form of twisted humor, are a manifestation of bigotry and hatred in our culture, some of which is buried so deep that people acting in such a way aren't even aware of the racism and homophobia they are perpetuating. And that is no excuse at all, not with the wealth of information and experience we have available to us. The reality of racism and homophobia escaped me for years until I was into my 20s. How does that happen? I ask myself this all the time, angry at myself for choosing to stay in the dark when the opportunity to educate myself on a few of the most important topics in our culture continued to be something I didn't take time for. I'm not here just to talk about my past, where I come from, or what caused me to be the way that I was. It would likely come out like a bunch of excuses, and there is simply zero excuse for the way that I once was. Having said that, I will be writing about aspects of culture and society that contribute to a mindset of privilege and a bigotry toward Black people and the LGBT community in the coming months. Today, I'm here to talk about the scariest aspect of the way I once thought, the fact that years ago I would have sworn up and down that I was in no way a contributor to the issues of racism and homophobia in our culture. And the fact that many of you either have or still do say that same thing today, but your lives, thoughts, and speech are telling a different story. In his article for the Players Tribune, which everyone should read, Cal Corver talked about two things that are indisputable facts when it comes to those that are privileged. The first was there is no sitting on the sidelines while the cultural battles in America on these two issues take place. Most people are not self-described racists or bigots, but they act, think, or speak in such a way to contribute to the problem. You are either educated and actively against racism and bigotry, or you are at least participating by sin of omission on something that simply cannot be ignored in our society today. There is no in between. Martin Luther King Jr. said the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence of the good people. Second, Corver talked about his privilege as a white man, meaning that at any point he can fade into the background on these issues and nothing about his life will change, while most Black and LGBT people will contend their entire lives against bigotry and bias. That's the privilege we have as white people in America. We cannot continue to be blind to that. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I have been outspoken on social media about the way I once was, how immersed in ignorance I was, and the many things that have changed in my life. I've encouraged others to educate themselves on these topics, listen to the words, and observe the actions of those who are more oppressed, and then act, speak, and write. Much of the past 3 years has been me listening, learning, and participating in dialogue within many circles of my life. Many of you have seen my tweets over the past few years, and some of you are closer to me, have had many conversations with me on these topics, contributed to my education, and are aware of the things I've done in my community and in my personal life to help raise awareness for the issues of racism and homophobia in our society. Some of you have even been sounding boards for me on future plans my wife and I have to organizationally educate young men and women in America on these two major issues so that the number of people who end up like I was is eventually extinct. Now, none of that negates who I once was, the people I once hurt, and the things I once said. I know that. Those mistakes will always be something I carry with me in some capacity, and they will continue to spur me on to speak out on these topics simply to keep others from ending up like I was. I also recognize that because of my privilege, it will be easier for people, especially those from non-impacted communities, to forgive me and move on. Although my apology and remorse is sincere, this is still a sign of a major concern in our culture that needs to change. I shouldn't get more leeway and more benefit of the doubt over a situation that my actions created because I come from privilege, while Black people in the LGBT community face more adversity and condemnation in their everyday lives that they never asked for or did anything to deserve. I also realize that some people will never forgive me, never believe I've changed from the person I once was. The reality is that with most people from a situation like my own, that is probably a safe assumption. Most people will say and do anything to convince others they've changed, when in reality that process is a lot more painful and ugly than they'd be willing to undergo. I won't ask for people from impacted communities to forget everything I've said in the past and move on. I don't have the right to ask that. And I won't harbor ill will toward anyone who chooses not to believe or forgive me. But I will use my past and my broadened perspective to speak and raise awareness on these issues for the rest of my life, not in hopes of making it up to the people I hurt, because I know that isn't possible, but in hopes of preventing others from ending up as I once was. That action will not just come in the form of written words, but also continuing to speak up in my community and in some new roles I'm currently exploring where I can speak directly into the lives of many young people in my area, many of whom come from privilege. We can change as people. We can break out of the narrow-minded way of thinking that led to the dismissal and hurt of others, and instead use our voices and passion to help make the world a better place for those that are less privileged. What I'm asking each and every one of you to do is simply check yourself for bias. Educate yourself on these issues. Vote for people who will make a stand for minorities in this country. Read any of a number of articles on systemic racism, the subtlety of racial or homophobic bias, or even police brutality. Most importantly, like Corver employed us to do in his article, listen. Don't assume you have all the answers or that the way you have always thought is what is right. I made that mistake for years and I hurt a lot of people in the process. I'm hoping that you can join me in paving a new path, one where we aren't afraid to see where we are broken and blind and ignorant and hateful, and take a proactive approach toward being the last generation that ever says or thinks the things I said and thought in the past. Thank you.